Alright, with this one you're going to need to have an open mind. Welcome to another episode of the GameSmith, and in this episode we're tackling coral once more. Well, twice more, because I have two different builds for you in this video. We're going to use the same base that we did in episode 1 and 2 of water accessories. Please check out episode 1 of series 3 to see how we made these. It also helps to have a few different size bases for this build. Now we switch our attention to this pasta that I found at a bulk food store. This little bag of pasta cost me 43 cents. I like the shape of this pasta because of these little ridge textures on the sides. Of course, you should use whatever shape and size pasta you want. I think we'll start with the large sized base. We'll attach the pasta with a glue gun. Before we start gluing the pieces down, we should note this pasta has two different ends. One end is usually crimped and the other end is more round. I suggest you put the hot glue on the crimped end and place it on the base. Then keep adding pasta to create a cluster as you see fit. You can create a pattern or just use random shapes. I suggest you check out some pictures or videos on coral if you're looking for some inspiration. I recommend that you don't overfill the base, leave a half to a third of its diameter empty. I also suggest varying the size of your scatter terrain. I've already started this build and you can see that I've already created a few clusters. I just want to add another cluster in order to fill in this space. I suggest you vary the size and the curve of the pasta that you use. You can see the different shades on the pasta here. This darker area is the hot glue that we use to glue the pasta down to the base. You could use your hot glue gun to fill in the tube in order to make the pasta more durable, but I recommend against that. I'll show you why later on in the video. Next, we're going to mix some matte Mod Podge with some dark green acrylic paint. We'll mix this in a 50-50 blend in order to cover our coral. I'm going to use a large brush in order to paint the pasta. However, I chose this one with the angled toe so I can get it down in between the stalks. Now we coat the paint mixture over the pasta. We want to make sure that we get all the exposed pasta. Don't worry about getting paint on the base, since we'll be repainting that soon. Now we switch to a smaller brush so we can get the paint down into the pasta tubes. We can also use the smaller brush to get down into the tiny gaps between the pasta stalks. Make sure your paint completely dries before moving on. Next, I chose to use a brighter green and add a few highlights to our pasta tubes. I'm going to pull the paint right from the bottle because I want this to go on quite thick. And I want to paint just the crowns of our coral tubes. I'm not trying to dry brush or even trying to capture the texture of the pasta. Nor am I concerned about all the uneven coloring on the different tubes. The color will darken and blend with the darker green undercoat as it dries, and I'm very happy with how this turned out. Next, we can repaint our base with our dark gray Mod Podge mixture. Or if you haven't painted your base yet, I suggest you do it now. In our last coral video, we talked about a few options for adding a glossy shine to our build. We're going to use this Puzzle Saver laminate on our pasta tubes. You don't need a thick layer to create the shine, so you can use the Puzzle Saver sparingly. The final result will create a wet-like sheen on our build. Next, we're going to overbrush our base with this turquoise-like color. Just as a reminder, this was discussed in episode 1 and on the dry brushing foundations video. We can see I got some turquoise paint on our green pasta tubes. We can remove the mess by using a brush soaked in water in order to clean up the paint. Then with a dry brush, we can drag the bristles over the affected area. The capillary action in the dry brush will soak up the water and remove the unwanted paint. In our final stage, I want to add some foliage from a plastic plant that I found at the dollar store. I like this foliage because of the shape, and the color palette is similar to that of our painted pasta tubes. I'll just pull off a branch and then separate these sections from one another. Be sure to leave yourself some stem-like sections on the bottom. We then just add some hot glue to the pasta and slide our foliage into the chute. Don't cluster the foliage too close together or you'll hide the pasta tubes below. You also don't want your build to look cluttered. And as the last plant is placed, our pasta cora build is done. If you have any suggestions for different types of pasta to use for this type of craft, please let us know in the comment section down below. Well, that was my take on coral made with pasta. Now let's move on to the second build. Never one to ignore inspiration wherever I find it, I found this microfiber washmit at the dollar store. To me, these wonderful fabric tubes look like coral. To begin this build, we need to disassemble our washmit. We need to turn it inside out in order to reveal the stitching inside. With a pair of scissors, clip the thread to separate the parts. If you have access to an actual seam ripper, I would suggest using that instead. Once you have a good start, you can usually pull the seam apart. We also need to cut off the fitted wristband. When we're done, we're left with this fibrous pad. Now we have this large seam on two of the edges and I need that removed. I'll just mark the area with a pen where I want to cut. And then I'll cut away the fabric that I don't want. Next, we want to cut our sheet into quarters. We can simply fold it in half and carefully cut it in order to avoid cutting through those fabric tubes. Then we can fold these other halves into quarters and cut them again. For our base, I want to use this styrofoam that I found at... Can you guess where? You guessed it, the dollar store! I chose this as a basing material because I want to create a mound shape with the washmit. However, there are other basing materials you might try. We could use this chipboard as we have in our other coral videos. For a mound shape, we could actually shape some XPS or insulation foam. We could easily cut the XPS foam and glue the washmit onto it. We could also use some foam core board and cut it into multiple shapes and then stack them together. The washmit would be the final layer in order to create the mound. However, the option I'm going to go with is the styrofoam ball. We need to cut our ball down to a size that will allow the washmit piece to actually wrap around it, so that it's flat on the bottom. You can use a knife, but I have this dollar store hacksaw that will actually create a clean edge. Now I'm just eyeballing the size of this, and I may have to cut it again later. We then rub the two pieces together to flatten out the bottom, and remove the styrofoam fragments. Now I'll match the size with our washmit piece. Wow, this should fit almost perfectly. Nice guess. Now I just have to clean up this mess, and we can move on. Next, we're going to glue our washmit piece to the styrofoam hemisphere with a hot glue gun. We also need a craft stick to press our two surfaces together, so we don't get burned. Because we're gluing a squarish shape to a sphere, we have to work in stages. We start by placing the hot glue across the end of the washmat piece. We then match the two edges together and roll the styrofoam hemisphere forward. We then push the square edges in and onto the styrofoam. Then with the craft stick, we maneuver the fabric around as we need to. It will take a few seconds for the hot glue to become cool enough to touch. Once the fabric is secure, we repeat this process centimeter by centimeter. We don't want to cover large areas of the foam with the hot glue. The fabric will stretch a little bit so we can actually pull it into place. Again, be careful of the hot glue as you repeat this process until the entire styrofoam hemisphere is covered. The final step is to add a base so we don't get foam fragments all over our game surface. I'll use my template to find a circle that's the same size as my build. I can then trace out the same size on a piece of chipboard and cut it out. Then with the hot glue, we simply attach the base onto our build. Again, be careful of the temperature. Then we've completed another coral scatter terrain build. Once again, build your scatter terrain in bulk, experiment, and be open to inspiration wherever it presents itself. The pasta coral is my favorite, and I'll be using other types of pasta in the future. For our next video, we're going to be building some underwater treasure mounds. If you'd like to support what we're doing here at the GameSmith, please hit the subscribe button. If you're already a subscriber, please hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment. You might also check out our blog at TheGameSmith.org. We post the building materials for all our crafts on our website too. You might also check us out on Facebook, Pinterest, and Instagram. Until next time, I'll see you at the table.